Welcome. Tonight, I will tell you a quiet story about the power of silence. We often believe that we must speak to be important, but sometimes words can destroy a dream before it is even born. Our story begins long ago in the city of Oria. Oria was a place of stunning beauty, built from white stone and surrounded by deep blue water. It was a city of artists, masons, and merchants. In Oria, the people loved two things above all else: beautiful buildings and loud conversation. From sunrise to sunset, the marketplaces were filled with the sound of gossip, bragging, and noise. In the center of this noisy city lived a young man named Elias. Elias was an architect, a builder of great skill. He was not just good, he was brilliant. Although he was young, his mind was filled with designs for towers that touched the clouds and bridges that looked like spider webs. He saw the world differently than other men. Where others saw a pile of rocks, Elias saw a palace. But Elias had one fatal weakness. He loved to talk about his plans more than he loved to build them. Every evening, Elias went to the local tavern. He would unroll his drawings on the table and speak loudly about his genius. He loved to see the people's eyes go wide. He loved the sound of their applause. He felt successful just by talking about his success. On this particular evening, the air in the city felt heavy and strange. The wind was changing direction, blowing cold air from the dark sea. Elias walked into the tavern with a smile, holding his biggest secret in his hands. He did not know that on this night, the noise of the city was about to cost him everything. Elias possessed a gift that few men have, but he also carried a hunger that could not be satisfied by work alone. On the morning of that strange day, Elias was sitting in his studio. The room was quiet, filled only with the smell of dry ink and old paper. The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. On his desk lay a large, fresh sheet of parchment. For 3 hours, Elias worked in a trance. His hand moved quickly, sketching lines and curves with perfect precision. He was designing something that Oria had never seen before. He called it the Tower of Light. It was not just a tall building. It was a machine of glass and stone. Elias had designed a complex system of mirrors that would catch the sunlight and reflect it miles out into the dark ocean. It was a masterpiece. It was the kind of building that makes a man a legend. At this moment, a wise man would have stopped. A wise man would have started the difficult mathematics to make sure the walls were strong enough. A wise man would have kept the drawing locked in a drawer. But Elias felt that familiar itch. He looked at the drawing and felt a rush of excitement. He did not want to do the boring math. He wanted to see the look of envy on other people's faces. He wanted the applause now. Why wait until it is built? He whispered to himself. The idea is the most important part. He rolled up the parchment, grabbed his coat, and rushed out the door. He walked straight to his favorite tavern, the Golden Cup. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of roasted meat. When Elias entered, he slammed the roll of paper onto the biggest table. "Friends," he shouted, his face glowing with pride, "look at what I have created. The king will have no choice but to choose me. The crowd gathered around. Elias unrolled the plan. He pointed to the mirrors. He explained the foundation. He showed them exactly how the light would travel. The people gasped. They clapped their hands and patted Elias on the back. "You are a genius, Elias." They shouted, "The greatest builder in Oria." Elias soaked up the praise like a dry sponge soaking up water. He felt intoxicated. In his mind, the tower was already finished. He felt the satisfaction of a job well done, even though he had not lifted a single stone. But amidst the noise and the cheering, Elias missed one small detail. In the darkest corner of the tavern, sitting alone with a mug of ale, was a man named Julian. Julian was also a builder, but he had no talent for design. However, he had a very sharp memory. Julian did not clap. He did not smile. He just leaned forward, his eyes locked on the open blueprints, memorizing every line. Elias was too busy listening to the applause to see the cold, calculating eyes watching him from the shadows. But this quiet discomfort was about to become something much heavier. A secret shared is no longer secret. It is a weapon given to an enemy. As the night went on, the crowd in the tavern began to thin out. Most men went home to their families, but Elias stayed. He was still glowing from the attention. It was then that Julian stepped out of the shadows. He walked slowly to Elias's table, carrying 2 fresh mugs of ale. He placed one in front of Elias with a smile that looked friendly, but did not reach his eyes. "That is a magnificent drawing. Elias," Julian said softly, "I have been a builder for 10 years, and I have never seen anything like it." Elias smiled, taking the drink. "Thank you, Julian. It is a revolution in architecture." Julian sat down opposite him. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But tell me, my friend, surely this is impossible? A tower of glass would shatter in the wind. The weight is too great for a normal foundation." This was a trap. Julian used flattery to hide his true intention. He played the part of the confused, simple student. Elias laughed, a loud, arrogant sound. He felt superior. He looked at Julian and thought, "Poor Julian. He works hard, but he does not have the vision that I have. I should explain it to him. That is why you are a bricklayer, and I am an architect," Elias said, tapping the paper. "Look here. The foundation is not solid stone. It is hollow, reinforced with iron bars in a cross pattern. It bends with the wind. It does not fight the storm. It dances with it." Julian nodded slowly. Iron bars in a cross pattern. Fascinating. And the measurements? Without thinking, Elias wrote the exact numbers on the edge of the paper. He gave Julian the key to the entire puzzle. He gave away the how, not just the what. Julian studied the numbers for a long moment. Then He finished his drink and stood up. "You are truly generous. Elias, thank you for the lesson." "Anytime, friend," Elias said, waving his hand carelessly. Elias walked home that night feeling lighter than air. The alcohol and the praise made him feel invincible. He climbed into his bed and closed his eyes, imagining the king shaking his hand. He imagined his name carved into the stone of the new tower. He thought he still had time to fix the details. He thought he would start the real work tomorrow. He was wrong. While Elias slept peacefully, a candle was burning late into the night in Julian's house. Julian was not sleeping. He was drawing. The morning sun usually brings hope, but for Elias, it brought only cold reality. 2 days later, the great hall of the king was packed with people. This was the day of the royal contest. Architects from all over the city had come to present their ideas for the new lighthouse. Elias stood at the back of the room, holding his rolled-up parchment. He felt nervous, but he also felt certain. He knew his design was the best. He waited for his name to be called. But then the king raised his hand. Next, the king boomed, "Master Julian." Elias froze. He watched as his friend Julian walked confidently to the front of the room. Julian did not just have a drawing. In his arms, he carried a beautiful, small-scale wooden model. Julian placed the model on the king's table. "Your Majesty," Julian said, his voice smooth and loud, "I present to you the Tower of Glass. It uses a hollow foundation reinforced with iron bars in a cross pattern. It does not fight the storm, it dances with it." Elias felt the blood drain from his face. Those were his words. That was his design. It is magnificent. The king cried out, looking at the model with delight. "I have never seen such a clever use of iron." Elias could not stay silent. He pushed through the crowd, his heart pounding like a hammer against his ribs. "No," Elias shouted. "That is a lie. That is my design. He stole it from me." The room went completely silent. The king looked down at Elias with a frown. Julian looked at Elias with a face of perfect innocence. "Elias," Julian said calmly, "do not be jealous. We all know you talk about great things, but I have never seen you build them. I spent weeks building this model. Where's your proof?" Elias unrolled his paper. "Here. I drew this." But the king shook his head. "A drawing is just ink. Elias, anyone can draw. Julian has built the model. He understands the structure. You are just making noise." As always, laughter rippled through the crowd. It started as a low murmur and grew into a roar. They were laughing at him. The genius architect. The man who talked too much. Elias looked around the room. He saw the faces of the people who had cheered for him in the tavern. Now, they were mocking him. He realized a terrible truth. His words had meant nothing without the work to back them up. He rolled up his drawing. He did not say another word. He turned his back on the king, on Julian, and on the city he loved. He walked out a great hall and kept walking. He walked past his house, past the tavern, and out through the city gates. By the time the sun went down, nothing in his life would be the same. Silence is heavy. It is much heavier than noise. When you speak, you release your pressure. When you are silent, you must carry the weight of your thoughts alone. Elias walked for 3 days until he reached the cliffs of Ul. It was a desolate place on the edge of the kingdom, where the gray ocean smashed against black rocks. There were no taverns here. There were no admirers. There was only the wind and the birds. I will build here, Elias thought, not for the king, not for the applause, for the truth. He set up a small tent and began to work. But this time, there was no paper and no ink. He had to dig the earth with a shovel. He had to carry heavy stones on his back, dragging them up the steep hill one by one. The work was brutal. Within a week, his hands, which used to be soft and stained only with ink, were blistered and bleeding. His back ached so badly that he could hardly stand up in the mornings. Many times, the old Elias wanted to scream. He wanted to run back to the city, find a pub, and complain about how hard his life was. He wanted someone to tell him, "Poor Elias, you are working so hard." But every time he opened his mouth to complain, he remembered Julian's smiling face in the court. He remembered the laughter of the crowd. No, he whispered to the wind. No more words. He swallowed his complaints. He turned his anger into energy. Months passed. The seasons changed from the warm autumn to the biting cold of early winter. Slowly, painfully, a structure began to rise from the black rock. It was not a tower of glass, for he had no glass. It was a tower of rough, dark stone. It was not pretty, but it was strong. Elias learned to listen to the stone. He learned that the rock had its own grain and its own will. He learned things he could never learn from a drawing. He learned that a foundation takes 3 times longer to build than the walls. But without it, the walls are nothing. One evening, he placed the final stone on the top level. He stood back, shivering in his thin coat. The tower was finished. It was ugly, lonely, and solid. He felt a strange sensation in his chest. It was not the wild excitement he used to feel in the tavern. It was a quiet, deep warmth. It was a feeling of reality. But nature does not care about our feelings. As Elias looked out at the ocean, he saw the horizon turning a bruised purple and black. The air grew suddenly still, and the birds stopped calling. The winter storm was coming, and this time there was no one to save him. The storm did not care about drawings, and it did not care about titles. The storm was a judge, and it came to test the work of every man in the kingdom. By midnight, the wind was screaming like a wounded animal. The ocean rose up and threw itself against the cliffs, sending sprays of salt water high into the air, smashing against the walls of Elias's tower. Inside, Elias was not sleeping. He was fighting. The wind was so strong that the heavy stone walls vibrated. A vibration is a terrifying thing for a builder. It means the structure is struggling to hold its breath. Water began to leak through the cracks in the rough masonry. The lantern, the great fire he had lit at the top, was flickering wildly. It will go out, Elias thought with panic. If the roof flies off, the fire will die, and the tower will be useless. He had a choice. He could stay downstairs in the dry, safe darkness, and hope the tower survived. Or he could go up to the exposed roof and tie down the wooden shutters that were banging in the wind. Fear gripped his legs. He was trembling. He remembered sitting in the warm tavern, laughing about dancing with the storm. I was a fool, he thought. A storm does not dance. It kills. But then he looked at the stone walls he had built with his own bleeding hands. This tower was not a lie. It was part of him. Elias grabbed a heavy coil of rope. He tied one end around his waist and the other around a heavy iron hook in the wall. He took a deep breath and pushed open the door to the roof. The wind hit him like a physical blow. It almost threw him off the edge of the cliff. The rain felt like needles on his face. He crawled on his hands and knees across the wet stone, dragging the rope behind him. He reached the loose shutters. The wood was slippery. His fingers were numb with cold. He pulled with all his strength, screaming against the roar of the thunder. If I fall now, a voice in his head whispered, no one will ever know. No one is watching. But Elias answered the voice. I am watching. And that is enough. With a final cry of effort, he pulled the shutter closed and tied the knot tight. The wind howled in anger, but the wood held. The fire inside the glass stayed bright. Soaked, freezing, and exhausted, Elias crawled back inside and collapsed on the floor. He curled into a ball, listening to the storm rage outside, waiting for the dawn to decide his fate. When the morning broke, the truth was standing tall against the sky. The storm had passed. The ocean was now calm, reflecting the pink and orange light of the sunrise. The air was clean and cold. Elias opened the heavy wooden door of his tower and stepped out. He looked up. The tower was covered in salt and seaweed. Some of the stones were chipped, and the roof was damaged. It did not look beautiful in the way a palace is beautiful. It looked like a warrior who had survived a battle. But at the very top, the fire inside the glass was still burning, a steady eye watching over the sea. Far away, in the city of Oria, the scene was very different. The king and his advisors were standing around a pile of twisted metal and shattered glass. Julian's Tower of Light lay in ruins on the ground. It had collapsed during the night. Julian stood near the rubble, his head hanging low. He had built the tower exactly according to the drawing Elias had given him. But he had not understood the why. He had built a foundation on soft sand near the harbor, not realizing that the hollow foundation Elias described needed solid rock to anchor it. He had copied the plan, but he had not built the understanding. Back on the cliffs, Elias heard the sound of horses. The king, followed by a group of silent knights, rode up the steep path. They stopped in front of Elias's ugly, strong tower. The king looked at the lighthouse. Then he looked at Elias. Elias was dirty. His clothes were torn. His hands were rough. He did not look like a genius architect. He looked like a common laborer. "We saw your light," the king said quietly. "3 of my ships were lost in the storm. They saw your fire and steered away from the rocks. You saved 100 lives last night." Elias bowed his head slightly. "I only kept the fire burning. Your Majesty." The stone did the rest. The king dismounted from his horse. "I was wrong, Elias, and the city was wrong. Come back with us. I will give you gold. I will give you the title of royal architect. Everyone will know your name." The old Elias, the man from the tavern, would have jumped for joy. He would have shouted, "I told you so." But the new Elias just looked at the ocean. He realized that he did not need the applause anymore. The satisfaction of the work was enough. "Thank you, Your Majesty," Elias said softly. "But I cannot go back to the noise of the city. There are other cliffs and other dark coasts that need light. I have more to build." The king nodded with respect. He left a bag of gold on a rock, not as payment, but as an offering. Then he turned his horse and rode away. Elias did not touch the gold. He picked up his hammer. There was a crack in the north wall that needed fixing. And for the first time in his life, he worked in perfect, happy silence. Let us listen to the story one more time, but faster and simpler. This will help you remember the important parts. Once, there was a young builder named Elias. He lived in Oria, a busy city full of noise. Elias was very smart and talented. He could draw beautiful buildings. However, Elias had a big problem. He loved to talk about his plans more than he loved to build them. He wanted people to clap for him before he did any work. One day, Elias designed a wonderful new tower. It was a tower of light. He was very proud of it. But instead of building it, he went to a tavern. He showed his secret drawings to a man named Julian. Elias explained exactly how the tower worked. He gave away his secret. Julian was not a true friend. He was jealous. He memorized Elias's plan. The next day, Julian built a small model and showed it to the king. The king was impressed. He thought it was Julian's idea. When Elias tried to speak, no one believed him. They laughed at him because he had no proof. Elias felt terrible shame. He left the city and walked to a lonely cliff by the sea. He decided to build his tower there. This time, he did not talk. He only worked. The work was very hard. Elias had to carry heavy stones and dig in the cold ground. His hands bled and his back hurt. Many times, he wanted to quit. He wanted to complain. But he remembered his mistake, so he stayed silent and kept working. Then, a huge storm came. The wind was terrible. In the city, Julian's tower fell down because he did not understand the deep foundation. But on the cliff, Elias's tower stood strong. Elias climbed to the top in the storm and kept the fire burning. In the morning, the king saw the light. He rode his horse to the cliff. He saw that Elias was a true genius. The king offered Elias gold and fame. But Elias had changed. He did not want to be famous anymore. He realized that words are empty, but work is real. He refused the gold and stayed on the cliff, happy to build in silence. I often think about the boy I was. When I close my eyes, I can still hear his voice, loud, arrogant, and desperate for attention. That boy was me, but he feels like a stranger now. I remember the night everything changed. I sat in the Golden Cup Tavern, holding my precious drawing. I felt like a king. I wanted everyone to look at me. I wanted them to say, Elias is the best. I was so drunk on their praise that I did not see the danger. I gave my plan to Julian because I thought I was untouchable. I thought my talent would protect me. I was wrong. The pain I felt in the king's court was not just anger. It was shame. When I saw Julian holding the model I should have built, I realized that I had betrayed myself. I had sold my dream for a cheap moment of applause. Leaving the city was the hardest thing I have ever done. The silence of the cliffs of Vol terrified me at first. In the city, I could hide behind words. On the cliffs, there was nowhere to hide. I remember the way of the stones. My hands bled for weeks. Every time I lifted a rock, I wanted to quit. I wanted to go back and argue with the king. But slowly, the work changed me. I learned to love the sound of the wind more than the sound of my own voice. I learned that a wall built in silence is stronger than a wall built with words. The night of the storm was my final test. When I crawled onto the roof, I was afraid I would die. But up there, in the dark and the rain, I felt something new. I felt peace. I knew that even if no one ever saw this tower, I knew it was good. That was enough. Now, I stay here by the sea. I do not need the gold, and I do not need the fame. I have my work, I have the stone, and I have the quiet. And that is everything I ever needed. And so, the lighthouse on the cliffs of Vol still stands today. If you sail by that coast, you will see its light cutting through the darkness, steady and silent. It reminds us that the strongest things in life do not need to shout. Thank you for listening to this story. We often feel like Elias. When we have a new plan, a new business, a fitness goal, or even a plan to learn English, our first instinct is to tell everyone. We want the reward before the work. We want people to say, "Wow, that is amazing," before we have even started. But as we learned tonight, talking burns the energy we need for building. Every time we share our plan too early, we give away a little bit of our power. The moral of this story is simple, but it is hard to practice. Work hard in silence and let your success make the noise. Be like the stone, not like the wind. The wind blows loud and then disappears. The stone sits quietly, but it lasts forever. I hope this story helps you this week. Maybe you are working on something difficult right now. Maybe you are studying alone or building a dream that no one else can see yet. Do not worry. Keep building. The light will come in the end. A question for you. I want to ask you a question for the comments section. Are you building something in silence right now? It could be your English skills, a new career, or a creative project. Let me know. Or, if you prefer, just type "I am building" to show your commitment. If you enjoyed this story, please click the like button. It helps other learners find these quiet stories. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new adventure. Sleep well, build strong, and I will see you in the next story. Good night.